All righty, we're back together for our live summary and Q&A. And I'm going to keep an eye on the chat feature to see if anybody joins us and to see if anybody has any specific questions. Let me pull up my notes. First of all, we're going to recap our session with Martha Peace about helping people who are struggling with pornography. So we're going to go to page 75 in our notes. There we go. All right, so I really found this very interesting and something that I've had to work with counselees about several times is helping them to understand how to handle inappropriate sexual relationships and pornography. Hi there, friends. Thanks for joining me.
We'll mute unless you ask us a question.
What did you say?
I said I'll leave it on mute unless we need to answer a question.
Okay, well, I welcome you to ask questions. You're the only two live people that are joining me right now. How did your sessions go?
Great. You're good.
Good. Where are you guys from?
Upstate New York.
Okay, cool. Neat. Okay, well, I was just going to go over the two sessions that we listened to, but why don't you tell me, what are some things that stood out in the two sessions that we got to listen to today?
Well, we were just processing some of the things.
Oh, good.
We were talking about the helping women who struggle with pornography session, and one thing that I remember from one of Jay Adams' books, maybe they're in other resources too, that there's charts that you can do that you ask the person, when do you struggle with this? What were you thinking about, or who were you with, or what music were you, that like, what are the triggers?
Oh, that's cool.
And we were talking about how it applies to the area of pornography, and then also pretty much any struggle. What are the things that contribute or kind of set you up for success or failure in that particular area?
Good.
Did you have anything else?
I don't think so.
And then the case study we talked about. She talked about how Jesus Christ had to live the perfect life, not just show up and die. And I was thinking about what that meant and the implications of that. And we were talking about like the idea of someone taking I'm thinking of the things that have been in the headlines about people who paid for their kids to get into college by someone taking their exams. And I was thinking, but that's what we needed. We didn't need someone to go in and just change the grade. We needed someone to take the test for us or get the vaccination for us so we could get into the country or, whatever. And that's what Christ did for us. So it was neat thinking about that. That wasn't specifically about the case study, but in the thoughts that she was sharing about law and grace. And we've talked about our own, I was talking about my own, one of my daughters and some things we're working through and how you balance law and grace in parenting. And it's complicated.
I was thinking the same thing as I was listening to her session, because you can't really parent without both of them. Like, your children need to know the law, like officially they need to know God's law, because that's what is required of every human, to live in that perfect way. And like, they're incapable of ever living that way. That's why they need Jesus. And that's one of the, my oldest is 19 right now and my second is 16. And I remember hearing, I think way back before I had kids, from a lady in our church, like, I was like asking, how do I help my children to choose to accept Christ? And she said, what you do is clarify your expectations so clearly that they're incapable of ever meeting the expectations without Jesus helping them. So it's like, you have to have the expectations and you have to have the gospel, and the expectations need to be biblical. I mean, of course, you're going to have house rules that are like, not in the Bible, but you don't deal with those the same way that you would do, like, we shouldn't lie and we shouldn't be unkind and we shouldn't hit. So yeah, I thought that was an interesting case study because it's not like an either or situation. If you just have grace with your children, they're just going to be spoiled.
Mhm.
And if you just have the gospel and never talk to them about their need, they're just going to maybe be prideful because they know a bunch of stuff, but they haven't seen their personal need for it.
How would you balance speaking? I'm Susan.
Hi.
You. How would you balance talking about things like that with an older child that, say, is, 19, 20, 21, who would live in your home? Because in counseling, you see moms and dads who don't know what to do with these kids. You know what I
Right.
mean? So any more information you can give us. I mean, you want to be kind and you want to show them grace, but it's really hard when they're that age to put controls on them. So do you have any more things that you can throw in there?
Let me grab my Bible. If you have your Bibles there, you can turn to Deuteronomy 30. This is a passage that I use a lot. And actually, it's funny. I never made this connection until right at this moment. Like, it just popped into my head because I use it so much. But I actually learned this passage when my husband and I were in biblical counseling for parenting.
Okay.
Because we had we had a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old at the time, and we loved Jesus, and I was a counselor, and we thought we were teaching them how to function correctly. But our counselor, who was actually Doc Smith, said, "But you're not using choices and consequences with them." And my response was like, "I will not bribe my children to obey." And he said, "Well, you apparently are parenting different than God parented." So he took us to Deuteronomy 30. And so verses 15 through 20, I think, are especially useful in a situation like what you're describing with an older child. I'll just go ahead and read it since we have plenty of time. Starting in verse 15, it says, "See, I have set before you today life and good, death and evil. If you obey the commandments of the Lord your God that I command you today, by loving the Lord your God, by walking in his ways, and by keeping his commandments, his statutes, and his rules, then you shall live and multiply, and the Lord your God will bless you in the land that you're entering to take possession of. But if your heart turns away, and you will not hear, but are drawn away to worship other gods and serve them, I declare to you today that you shall surely perish. You shall not live long in the land that you're going over the Jordan to enter and possess. I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that I have set before you," and this is the thing that we use a lot in parenting, "I've set before you 2 choices, blessing and curse, life and death. Therefore, choose life, that you and your offspring may live, loving the Lord your God, obeying his voice and holding fast to him. For he is your life and length of days, that you may dwell in the land that the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to give them." And so what that passage is laying out is that God parents us by providing us with a very clear understanding of the consequence up front. And then he says, choose the choice that is attached to that consequence. So if you want good consequences, make the choices that result in good consequences. And so he says in verse 15, "I've set before you today life and good, death and evil." And so you can see the tie between good. If we do good, and we would define good as what God has said is righteous, then you will have life. And if you want evil, if you want death, then choose evil, which is anything that is opposed to what God has said. And I don't know if you guys were with me during the devotional at the beginning of the night, but that's actually the topic that I talked about, was that in the Garden of Eden, Satan tempted them with disbelieving that they would actually have death if they chose to know evil. And God had warned them, not that he's like, "I'm going to smite you because I hate you." It's like, "I want to protect you. I don't want you to know evil because death is attached with evil, and I created you to live forever." And so I would use this passage, and I often use this passage in counseling with older teenagers, to say, like, we want you to have a good life. And we know that the only way you're going to get that good life is if you choose righteousness. And you have to explain it in a way that kids will understand. If you choose what God has said is good and say there are standards that are not changeable. And then on the practical side, like, if you've not been teaching your children this since they were little, it's kind of mean to dump it on them when they're 19. So that's the parenting side of it. It will work way better if you started when you were young. But if you did, you can still teach choices and consequences. Just sometimes the consequences are a lot more stinky and they're a lot harsher. So some of them could be like we have an adult child living in our home. And I was actually just looking at my phone a little bit ago, and I saw the rules that we had written for our adult child to live in our home. And we just outlined, like, we would like you to do this, and we would like you to do this. And if you do these things, we would love to have you live in our home as long as possible, because we want you to save money. Like, go to school, save money for a house. But then we also clarified, like, if you choose to do these things, then we love you, but we'll just ask that you don't live in our home. Because in this home, we love and serve Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. And so, like, I think each family would have to look at that differently, but choices attached to consequences will teach exactly what Elise was talking about. Like, it teaches the standard, and it teaches that there is a way to meet the standard, but you're not capable of doing it without Jesus helping you.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I would still use the same method, even with an older child. I would just really make sure that I was presenting it in we love you so much way, and not like hammer right. Time, like we're just gonna pound you.
And I was, as you were talking, I was thinking about, when you do have to ask a child to leave, like I have 6 children, so they're leaving, at different times, and I only have one left. But at one of them, we actually said, have you found an apartment? Have you been looking? So, I mean, I think it's important to help them to go.
Oh, yeah.
They have to go. It's not like I put your stuff on the curb.
Exactly.
Right.
And hopefully they will have been being trained for that little by little over time, so that we all understood there was an expectation at some point you would go have your own life.
Right.
I think it also depends if it's a guy or a girl kid. Like, I don't want my single daughters out in the world unprotected. And I don't want them just spending a bunch of money on an apartment just because they can. Like, it's Jesus's money that they're wasting. So, there's lots of things involved, and it takes a lot of wisdom.
Right. And it's ultimately your decision whether they stay there, but it's ultimately their decision where they go. And we have to live with that too. And that's very, very hard to think, but you can't live there.
We can't be happy with everything sometimes.
Right.
I think if we're going to bring this back to the gospel, we're helping them understand that every choice they make does have a consequence. And if they make their choices with righteousness in mind, and by that I mean God has a definition of what is good and what is right, and my heart is endeavoring to do what he says is good and right, they're generally going to have better consequences. Like, if they budget their money, they're generally going to have enough money to pay their bills.
Right.
And so there's always going to be gospel conversations that we can have that tie them back to Jesus. Like, you won't be able to do this without Christ. You have to have the empowerment. The Holy Spirit needs to be in you so that you can meet these challenges. So if they're not a believer, there's still going to be lots of opportunities to introduce the gospel inside of growing up and moving out kinds of conversations. Cool. We have like 1 more minute before you need to start your next session. Do you have any other questions or comments?
Not really.
No, but we're so glad you are talking to us. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
I'm so glad to meet you, Kim and Susan. I hope you enjoy your next 2 sessions. And I am not going to come back tonight, but I'll see you bright and early tomorrow morning. So I can't wait to talk to you again.
Great.
We had trouble with the audio or with the video, so that's why we missed you when we started.
But did you eventually get on?
Oh,
yes.
Yeah, we watched it all.
Okay. Well, I think you can go back in the notes and watch previous recordings if you want to. I don't know how that works.
You would be on there.
But I'll be here tomorrow too, so we can chat more tomorrow.
Okay,
right,
good.
Thanks.
Have a good evening.